Hello, listeners. Welcome to BornCurious, coming to you from Harvard Radcliffe Institute. I'm Heather Min.
And I'm Ivelisse Estrada. On this podcast, we help illuminate some of our nation's most pressing issues by digging into ideas and research percolating here at the Institute.
In this episode, we're going to consider the psychological toll of our current healthcare landscape on doctors and what that means for those seeking care.
We're excited to have here with us Ashwini Nadkarni, who goes by Ash. She and her colleague John Frumson led a seminar here at Radcliffe to make headway on a major issue affecting a portion of the nation's doctors.
Dr. Nadkarni, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. So I am a physician, psychiatrist, writer, mom. I have leadership roles in psychiatry at Mass General Brigham as vice chair for faculty enrichment, and also an academic position and affiliation with Harvard Medical School as an assistant professor of psychiatry.
So, Ash, why psychiatry?
I'm part of a first generation South Asian immigrant household. And growing up, I really saw how my parents were treated in healthcare systems and systems in general. One of the most common questions that I saw my parents getting asked was, "Do you speak English?" Still a question that I see my dad getting asked in places like a grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
And I really recognized the way in which, um, as my parents struggled to really belong to part of a community, it affected their mental health and our mental health. It affected, our sense of identity. It affected our sense of belonging. It really impacted how we approached every day. And when I went to medical school, I really went to medical school to be a primary care physician. For me, that seemed like a great path to care for patients and advocate for people. But I chose mental health because it was something that really spoke to me. You know, I recognized the way in which um, it's really mental health that shapes people's day-to-day experiences of their health. Nearly every medical condition, whether it's diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, a stroke, interfaces with mental health. One of the things that I do is specialize in caring for patients with disorders of gut-brain interaction and inflammatory bowel disease. And we know that for individuals with IBD, depression can affect their time to relapse of an inflammatory episode. It can affect their response to treatment. It can affect their day-to-day symptoms of IBD.
We talk about mind and body, but it's all just one person. So,
Absolutely.
So, what led you to study burnout?
So I had this personal experience of being so thrilled to be in medicine and come to the Brigham, but then see how changes within a healthcare system can actually push people to leave a practice that they'd spent their entire lives trying to pursue. And there's something there that is deeply troubling to me about that, right? Like, medicine is not a profession that you pursue based on an impulsive decision. It takes years to be on this path, and then not wanting to provide care to patients, which personally for me is the reason that I went into medicine, seems so devastating to me. And my observation was that people who left were consistently women. They were women with intersecting identities, women who often had caregiving responsibilities, women physicians of color, women physicians throughout the hospital who were in very high demand medical specialties. And it was really at that time I thought to myself, wow, this is affecting our patients. Because when physicians leave medicine, patients are left bereft, right? Who are they going to see? Who's going to help them?
Mm.
Recognizing the impact of that turnover, I thought to myself, I have to figure out a way to address this. Now, of course, I was only one junior faculty member at that time, but it began for me this journey of agency and trying to identify how, as a physician in this large system, we could identify interventions to address this
Mm.
issue of
Mm.
burnout.
We should probably back up and define burnout.
I was just thinking the same thing. So, workplace burnout refers to this triad of emotional exhaustion or depletion, the reduced sense of personal accomplishment, and cynicism. And of course, anyone in any discipline can and probably has experienced some sense of burnout. Burnout is distinct from something like depression because it's really linked to the workplace. It's not linked to a whole host of external factors or stressors. And it refers to that triad of symptoms. With depression, for instance, you can experience changes in your concentration, changes in your ability to enjoy your life, suicidal ideation, issues with appetite, energy, or sleep. That's not burnout. We know that burnout is that reduced sense of meaning in your work.
So these doctors, when they're not at work, they feel fine.
They can feel fine.
Okay.
Yes. On the other hand, burnout can bleed
Okay.
into other parts of your life, right? Um, so it's associated with the workplace, but it can impact the rest of your life.
If I may, though, I gotta ask, medicine has always been notorious for being very challenging and demanding. People know what they're signing up for. So why is burnout, as you see it, among established physicians, anything novel from what has always been the case?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's a career path that is really selective, right? And roots out individuals who maybe don't have necessarily the stamina. But I think COVID-19 really changed the landscape of burnout because what it showed us is that if we don't find ways to enhance professional fulfillment in medicine, patients do suffer. There is a growing distrust and what feels like skepticism of science and healthcare in general, right?
Mhm.
There's no question that I think we all feel that in the current socio-political landscape. And that is really hard to see happening, you know? Um, Treatments that are empirically supported, including in psychiatry. For instance, antidepressants, which save people's lives every day,
Mhm.
right? The science behind that is being attacked. And the stigma around mental health is rising as we speak.
Mm.
Really hard to watch that because it feels like actually our patients are being attacked, and that this way of work, which saves people's lives, is being attacked. That feels like a new kind of crisis to me
Mm.
personally. I think people are really suffering seeing everything that's happening in the socio-political climate. People's identities are being attacked. People are really at risk, right? I think it's been more important than ever for physicians and for psychiatrists and people in the mental health space to speak openly and transparently about these issues, to reinforce the value of mental health care, and to recognize, that science is truth, right?
Mhm.
So, why is this happening? What are the physicians experiencing that they are experiencing burnout?
Yeah. So, great question. A fantastic framework for understanding drivers of burnout is the Stanford Wellbeing Framework, where they look at culture, the language, the values that reinforce a sense of resilience within healthcare systems. There's the systems, the workflows, the processes, the practices that set everyone up in healthcare for success in caring for their patients. And then there are also factors related to individual resilience. For instance, what kind of stressors are physicians dealing with that relate to, for instance, their sleep or their levels of stress in their personal life. And what that framework has shown is that from a cultural standpoint, individual physicians are increasingly feeling that their personal values are not always aligned with the systems in which they work, and the value of putting the patient first, that the systems in which we work can be inefficient, right? For instance, 10, 15 years ago, we really saw electronic medical records coming in, right? And changes with that have really left a lot of physicians feeling like they're no longer talking to their patients as much as they are looking at a screen during the day. So it's a great example of like a process practice that is seeding inefficiency and reinforcing that sense of values a little
Mm.
bit.
If you could explain further, like what the day-to-day schedule and the pressures of a practicing physician is, that would be helpful for us to fully appreciate why this burnout is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a specialist, I can certainly speak to that. Although I will say I'm lucky because I do get 30 minutes to spend with
Mhm.
patients on follow up. Part of the challenge is that healthcare systems are facing this existential threat to their survival, right? They are struggling to keep up with all of the financial challenges, the policy changes, the technological advances, and that pressure can be uh, displaced onto physicians at the front line who are under pressure to make sure that they're seeing the right volume of patients. At the same time, they're trying to provide that high quality of care. So they are incorporating, these um, structured tools into their practice that may make it harder for them to actually spend time with individual patients, right? They're also trying to ensure that patients are really getting close communication and support, right? For instance, through patient portals, you
Mhm.
get a chance to ask the doctor a question. Do healthcare systems bill for that? They don't. And the doctor is the one to spend all the time answering the questions. So, if they have something like 20, 25 minutes to spend with every patient, maybe 10 is going to be spent with the patient, talking to them, another few working on their note, another few answering those patient portal questions, another few making sure that they've checked off all the different surveys and questionnaires that they've needed to complete. They've got to put in those orders. There's so much. And even as I talk about it, I'm actually experiencing some cognitive overload, frankly. You
Right.
know, that cognitive overload, I think, is another piece of the puzzle.
So it sounds like then this work is bleeding outside of the scheduled work hours.
That's right. Yeah. There's myriad responsibilities and obligations beyond the face-to-face interaction with the patient that go into care. And yet the time is not always there to fulfill all those
Mhm.
responsibilities.
Can you share with us more about the impact that physician burnout is having and will have on patient care?
Absolutely. So a big piece of that puzzle is access to care. When a physician leaves an institution, thousands of patients can be left bereft of care. So that is a huge challenge and a reason to try to ensure that we retain physicians in practice. But another issue is also the quality of care that patients receive. Imagine the experience of being treated by a physician who has reduced empathy or humanism or has that increased sense of cynicism, right? Patient centered care really involves recognizing a holistic perspective on the needs that patients have. And so, thinking about my own experiences as a patient, I want to be seeing that doctor who's focused on me, who has that strong sense of humanism and will do everything that they can to help me. I think it goes back to this idea of what it means to practice medicine. The Hippocratic Oath is about that pledge that physicians take to really provide extraordinary care to their patients and to really support them whatever the need is that they may have, but also, to support the future generations of physicians as well. And I think when physicians lose that sense of humanism and generativity, there's no question that our patients suffer. And patients feel it. They feel it. They tell us. They report that. I'm sure you've had friends or even yourselves have that experience of being treated by a physician who you knew that their head wasn't in it.
Mm. Am I right in understanding that there's already not as many primary care physicians as as are needed?
Yeah, there's a shortage of primary care physicians. Primary care today, of course, not being a primary care physician, I really am not the person to
Right.
speak to it, but having done research in this area of burnout and certainly having a number of colleagues who are in primary care, they're doing everything, right? They're doing everything. They're part of that front line for patients. And so absorbing all of that responsibility and accountability certainly has its consequences.
You touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'd like to hear kind of a more detailed explanation of why women are maybe feeling this. Are they feeling this more, and if so, why?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. There's data out there that shows that patients who receive care from women physicians are less likely to face mortality issues and less likely to be readmitted on hospitalization. But 6 years after graduating from residency, 40% of women physicians will either work part time or leave practice. And as you mentioned, the question is why? In the Harvard Radcliffe exploratory seminar that I and our experts in gender equity and well being came together to address this issue, we identified four key drivers of burnout, which tends to be much higher among women physicians. The first is really high rates of gender discrimination, bias, and sexual harassment for women physicians.
So the patients like the women doctors more, but their colleagues
The
maybe
doctors
don't.
still have challenges.
And another factor
Yes.
that can play into that is also not only sexual harassment, gender bias, gender discrimination, but gender inequity in compensation, disproportionate levels of administrative burden that women physicians have, and then finally, challenges to work life integration. During COVID, we saw that in dual physician families, women physicians were 30 times more likely to take up with the household tasks and caregiving responsibilities. So, work life integration has been and continues to be a challenge that really worsens burnout among women physicians.
So division of labor and yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Wow.
So you mentioned 40% after finishing the residency are working part-time, if not have retired from the profession altogether. But at this point, as best as you're aware, what is the gender proportion in terms of students in medical school
Yeah.
and various different specialties?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because there's this funnel that happens that plays out through the careers of women physicians, which is that a roughly equal number of women physicians matriculate to medical schools as compared to um, men medical students. And yet, over time, women physicians have much higher rates of attrition.
Mm.
So what we see is that as women physicians advance in their careers, fewer and fewer women physicians will be in those senior leadership roles or even in those senior academic positions. For instance, at Harvard Medical School as a professor.
do you have any sense of what proportion of people in leadership positions, who shape the working conditions of uh, doctors who work for large institutions? So, what proportion of them are women?
Yeah, it's a great question. Off the top of my head, I don't have a data to tell you, what proportion of, for instance, uh, chief medical officers or chief executive officers of healthcare organizations are women. I think it's fair to say we have fewer women
Mhm.
in leadership positions across healthcare systems than we should. I think another point that your question raises is how do we architect change,
Mm.
right? And leadership support is a huge aspect of that and gets back to what we identified as a solution in our exploratory seminar.
So what did you talk about? What did you find?
Yeah, so over a 2-day period, we identified these 4 key drivers of burnout that I referenced,
Mm.
inequities in compensation, disproportionate administrative burden, the high levels of sexual harassment and gender discrimination, and challenges to work life integration. And what we recognized is that within healthcare systems, those CEOs and CMOs need to ensure that we are leading interventions that are rooted in both structure and culture, right?
Mhm.
Like we need the policies, the processes, the practices of structure. On the other hand, we won't get anywhere with reinforcing those structures unless we architect change with culture, right? It's fabulous when systems have equitable compensation policies. But if the person you're working for has implicit bias,
Mhm.
right, to a person's intersectional identity, what good does that policy do, right? We have to have mechanisms for accountability when it comes to culture.
Mm.
And what we identified as a mechanism for accountability was data collection, you know, recognizing, who's getting paid what, right? How many incidents of sexual harassment actually happen within healthcare systems? Can we report on that transparently? Can we collect data from the front lines and combine it with empirically supported guidelines to come up with interventions that we then iterate and then continue to collect data on, make that data transparently available to everybody, and then continue to refine those interventions. So, data collection, which is transparent, holds people accountable. And in the domain of quality improvement in healthcare, we call that a learning health system.
Mm.
So we really expanded on that piece.
I like that you're giving these concrete steps, so it's not just sitting people down and saying, now, you have to treat the women doctors nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a matter of taking these steps that can reinforce a sense of accountability.
Mm.
We came up with this 7-step map. So, in the first step, a healthcare system or a medical school can put together a group of individuals who really lead this work. And that should include individuals who are involved in burnout work, but it should also include leaders in diversity, equity, inclusion, because we know that the burden of burnout is highest in individuals with intersecting identities.
Mm.
I should also include healthcare leadership for systems, and it finally should include individuals who are at the front lines because it's really that authentic feedback that makes the recommendations and interventions resonate. As part of the second step, it's key to identify baseline metrics and measure what's going on at the front lines. There are fantastic surveys out there to assess professional fulfillment and burnout, including the Maslow Burnout Inventory or the Professional Fulfillment Index. So, identifying that data at baseline is part of the second step. Third is collecting that baseline data and frontline feedback and combining it with empirical interventions to implement strategies. An example of a strategy that has been implemented at Mass General Brigham is ambient documentation, right? You go into the doctor's office. They now have an app on their phone that will listen to the visit and document it
Mm.
in the EHR so that the doctor can sit there with you, really listen to
Yeah.
you, and at the end of the visit, generate a note. What a fantastic intervention, right? That
Now,
leverages technology.
What about privacy, though?
So, informed consent is a
Okay.
critical component of that.
Mhm.
And, healthcare startups have fantastic transparency about, what happens to the recording.
Mhm.
So, all of this is no question conducted with transparency and consent. But it's a great example of an intervention that has reduced burnout at Mass General Brigham.
yeah, because when you were recounting how you spend your day as a physician providing care, you said half of it is paperwork, really. I was thinking, well, why don't you hire a secretary? But yeah,
Nowadays, there's
yeah,
AI,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then you collect data on the interventions. That's the next step of the learning health system and see how those interventions are faring at the front lines. You then iterate and then you keep that cycle going of interventions. In our own department, we've also worked on ways to build a sense of community and belonging
Mm.
as well. I really want to reinforce that point as well because in our seminar, we examine the ways in which it's not just about the structures, it's about the culture, right? It's about that sense of connectedness. It's about that sense of identifying with a higher purpose. That has been for me a big part of being a physician, right? It's not just about for me treating the patients in front of me. It's also about impacting their health through a lifetime, right? Making it possible for them to live a higher quality of life. There's a sense of generativity for me in teaching medical students or trainees or even um, scholarship and writing about these experiences. And in our department at Mass General Brigham in psychiatry, we are looking at ways to really help people feel that they belong. In medicine, a huge part of that is mentorship.
Mm.
Feeling like you have somebody that you have that strong sense of connection with who helps you develop personally and professionally and guides you through your career and really has your back, you
Mm.
know? And I have led mentorship programs and have a very strong interest in mentorship because I think it's such a fantastic way to help people feel a sense of pride about their authentic identity and to feel that they belong to a community.
Mm. Has your department formally accepted this roadmap? Are they implementing this roadmap or?
So, our department
Yeah.
has engaged in a number of interventions that
Okay.
we uh, identified in the seminar. And I have the fantastic luck of being able to lead that work. So, I'm very much
Mm.
engaged in applying this practically in our department.
What's one specific way that one could combat burnout in these types of workplaces?
Sure. So, one intervention that's been shown in research to work at both the individual and systems level to address burnout is coaching.
Mm.
So, coaching involves working with someone to identify specific goals that you can reach and includes enhancing your emotional intelligence
Mm.
and your interpersonal skill set. Ultimately, what coaching asks the individual to do is identify their values and align their practice with those values.
Mhm.
So, for instance, if someone comes into a healthcare system and says yes to everything,
Mhm.
right? They're caring for patients. They say yes to the leadership role where they're now working with trainees, and then they say yes to all the countless research projects, and then they say yes to, mentoring all of the junior faculty members, they're quickly going to get burned out, right?
Mhm.
How do you say yes in a way where you can find those activities that are genuinely reinvigorating, but not in a way that burns you out, right?
Mhm.
Coaching is such a great area of agency, too. I think oftentimes when people feel burnt out, they feel helpless. They don't feel like there's a way for them to change their situation.
Mm.
Coaching gets you into that mindset where you can have a sense of agency about changing your world.
Let me ask you this, because you don't, you teach and you research, you do the research, but you also practice.
Hmm.
Are there steps that you personally take to try to ward off that burnout?
Honestly, I have a fantastic set of peers who have great senses of humor, remind me of the importance of, laughing in life. I have fantastic mentors and leaders, and I have a very supportive family, including a partner who, you know, takes care of the kids when I have a meeting in the evenings, right?
Mhm.
Like, it is also about your personal life and those individual factors that drive resilience.
Yeah. You keep, it seems like the things that really feed you are part of that community
Yeah.
step of the roadmap.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It takes a village.
Right.
I think another piece of this for me is spending a lot of time with my dog. I have a golden retriever and
What's the dog's name?
Waffles. My boys named him. They're 7 and 8. So I take Waffles for long walks. I think I try to be proactive in my life too. I've tried very hard to structure my career in a way where I do things that have a lot of value for me, right? Like they really align with my personal set of values. In medicine, sometimes I think people can pursue career paths, maybe because it feels like it's the most glamorous specialty or the most high paying specialty. I didn't do that. I pursued psychiatry because it aligned with my personal values. I'm doing what I genuinely love to do. But I also have to say, I spend a lot of time traveling. And for me, traveling is not just a way to broaden my perspective and understanding of the world and of people in the world. It's also a way for me to engage in self reflection.
Mm.
It's interesting actually. Boredom and spending time doing nothing is a way that enhances your sense of self awareness and
Mm.
creativity. I'm not sure everyone knows that.
Thank you for making me feel better. When
So, if you're going to take an elevator up 2 floors, don't look at your phone.
Okay.
Just stand there and do nothing and stare into space. Because even as much as like 15 minutes of boredom a day can start to stimulate, your creativity. And when I travel, there's a sense of nothingness that I love there. Um, Last year, I actually took this amazing trip to Kenya and Rwanda.
Wow.
And I did the gorilla trek in the Masenza Mountains.
Oh.
Yeah, and you're just walking, you're just hiking, you're thinking about absolutely nothing, right? But when you get to the top of the mountains, you get to have this extraordinary experience, and the experience is one of awe.
So vent to your
Synergy.
spot. So vent to your spouse.
Yep.
Embrace boredom. Get a dog named Waffles, and stay off your device, and travel
Travel.
and experience awe. These are your professional recommendations for all of us.
Absolutely. And you can have awe without traveling. For instance, just walking around in this quad, appreciating the beauty and the history of it, can generate a sense of awe. Incredible things have happened in this quad, right? Through history.
But stop and smell the roses. If a physician out there listening wanted to kind of, start making their own workplace, a little bit better place for everyone. Where can they look for help, or what should they do?
Yeah, so we published, I will say, I'm going to promote it. We published our paper um, on implementing this organizational roadmap to address burnout among women physicians. There's some fantastic resources out there too. For instance, through the National Academy of Medicine, the American Medical Association, the AAMC, or the American Association of Medical Colleges, publishes great data and toolkits on this work. And also, I would be more than happy to talk to people about this work because I'm so passionate about it.
And we will link to the paper in our show notes for our listeners so they can look there.
Thank you for the ray of hope.
Thank you, Ash, so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful to talk to you and learn about this growing challenge and how we can make it better.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for the great work that you do.
Thank you.
That concludes today's program.
BornCurious is brought to you by Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Our producer is Catello Grazioso. Anna Soong and Cabin 3 Media provided editing and production support. Many thanks to Jane Huber for editorial support. And we are your co-hosts. I'm Ivelisse Estrada.
And I'm Heather Min.
Our website, where you can listen to all our episodes, is radcliffe.harvard.edu/BornCurious.
If you have feedback, you can email us at info@radcliffe.harvard.edu.
You can follow Harvard Radcliffe Institute on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Threads. And as always, you can find BornCurious wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for learning with us.
And join us next time.